Hello, my name is Marianne and I'm an alcoholic. I'd like to welcome you to Recovery in Action Life on Life's Terms. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. We're glad you're all here, especially newcomers. In keeping with our singleness of purpose and our third tradition, which states that the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking, we ask that all who participate confine their discussion to their problems with alcohol. This is an open Big Book step study meeting where we discuss the 12 steps of recovery as they're written in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, with the focus on their application in everyday life and recovery. This is the 12th session of the 7th cycle of the workshop that was presented on October 19th, 2024, where we completed the 10th step. Next week we'll begin the 11th step. If you would like to contribute to the 7th tradition, you may do so using the QR codes displayed. Contributions are applied towards the group's expenses and support our service offices. Recordings of the workshop are available, and if you would like to be placed on the distribution list, please send an email to recoveryinaction462@gmail.com to receive the links, or you can visit our YouTube channel. The workshop typically begins with a brief meditation in which an inspirational music video is played. Because of copyright restrictions, it cannot be on the video. However, a link is provided, and I suggest you take a minute, view the video, and take a brief meditation for yourself before you begin the workshop. As the recording begins, the workshop is already in session. Feel free to contact me if you have any additional questions or require my assistance further. I hope you enjoy the workshop. Another custom of this group is to start the workshop by saying the full version of the Serenity Prayer. We're all familiar with the first part, but many of us are unaware that there is a second part to it, and I believe it's this second part of the prayer that reflects what recovery is all about. So if you would all please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace, taking as he did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen. We are in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is the book of instructions on how to work the 12 steps, which are the set of instructions on how to get rid of the things that are blocking us off from our higher power, how to get connected to God, and how to stay surrendered from alcohol making our life unmanageable. However, merely reading the big book without experiencing it is a useless activity, because we cannot learn how to swim, for example, without jumping in the water. And then we have to practice and practice and practice, and specifically do the things that the big book says to do. So if we go into the big book, the cover page states that this is the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism, which means that the problem is removed. I don't have to make a choice as to whether I drink or not, because I don't even think about it. I automatically turn to God instead of alcohol when I'm upset. It's no longer an option to solve my problems. Selfishness and self-centeredness are gone. I'm no longer angry, fearful, or harmful, and my old destructive ways of thinking and acting have been replaced by new and peaceful ones. Then we jump to the 10th step promise, which is on page 84, which states that it has become a way of life. We've ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol, for by this time sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. We'll see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That's the miracle of it. We're not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we had been placed in a position of neutrality.
safe and protected. We've not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We're neither cocky nor are we afraid, and that's our experience so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. Then we jump to page 27, which defines recovered as ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. Then we go from page 27 to the back of the book in the appendix. The spiritual experience defines recovered as being a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. And then we go back to the forward to the first edition, which states that we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. It later goes on to say that the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. However, the desire to stop drinking is not the only requirement to become recovered. There's other things involved, such as being willing and actually doing everything that the big book says to do, which starts with step one. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. This is the self-knowledge piece. In other words, I've got to know and admit that I am an alcoholic and that my life is unmanageable as a result of that. However, just this self-knowledge is not enough. As a real alcoholic, the only thing self-knowledge does is make me realize that I cannot take just one drink without being physically driven to take one drink after another. This then allows me the opportunity, if I'm spiritually fit, to pass on that first drink. And I can only do this on a continuous basis if I'm connected to my higher power, which then brings us to step two. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And that brings us to just looking at this one question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than me that can solve my problem? If I can answer yes to this question, then I'm done with step two, which brings me to step three. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. It brings us to the third step prayer, where we offer ourselves to God. What step three is merely making that decision. We don't turn our will and our life over to the care of God in step three, which is a big misconception that we hear all the time. What we're doing in step three is we're making a decision. We're going to God and saying, okay, God, I offer myself to thee. I'm asking God to allow me to do this. And then, as part of that decision, I agree to do the rest of the work, which starts with step four, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And this is where we looked at the four inventories, which are our resentments, our fears, and the harms that we've done to others, including and excluding our sexual conduct. And as we did this, we started looking at ourselves. And what we found was that in most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relations, including sex, were hurt or threatened. On our grudge list, we set opposite each name our injuries. This is where we looked at what other people did to us. Was it our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal or sex relations that had been interfered with? And that helped us to identify these these parts of self, which were our self-esteem, our pocketbook, our emotional security, our ambitions, and our personal relations, including our sex relations. And that brought us to page 67, which states, now that we're looking at ourselves, where had we been? Selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. Though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight. This is on page 67. And what this identified was 5 main character defects. I'm selfish, I'm dishonest, I'm self-seeking, I'm frightened, and I'm inconsiderate. So we have 5 main character defects, and then these boil down into some additional character defects, which I included a list of just for just to simplify the process. And these are just some of these additional character defects. And these specific character defects are important because as we get more into working the steps, the big book lists things like mean, egotistical, indignant, self-pitying, self-centered, and self-delusional. When we get to step 6 and 7, the instructions include that we're ready to let God remove from us all of the things which we have admitted are objectionable and every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. So while every character defect falls within the major 5 or a combination of them, it's better to be more specific. So for example, people pleasing is really being dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened all at the same time. But people pleasing gives a more accurate description of what I'm actually doing. So in reality, we experience the same stuff over and over and over again because we repeat what we don't repair. And this happens again and again because our character defects come into play. Therefore, it's not the person listed in the first column of your resentment inventory that's causing your unhappiness, but it's a character defect that comes into play. So keep in mind that we're not bad people trying to get good, but sick people who are trying to get well. We may have done some pretty awful things, but those things do not define who we really are, and we've done nothing that we need to be punished for. When we get to steps 8 and 9, we take actions rather to correct these harms. Remember, when you're working the steps, you end up with the same personality you always were, no matter who you're with. So once your character defects are removed, you no longer have the negative consequences that came about by the behaviors you had when you were at step 1, nor do you have inappropriate reactions to what's going on around you. As a result, all of your relationships change. Remember, when the rest of the steps are done, any remaining resentments may go away in a short period of time. However, it's important to remember that God will only do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. When we get into the fear and harms inventories, we look at column 4, where we list the things that we're capable of doing. This now brings us to step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. It's important to remember here that step 5 is done so that you can see what's blocking you off from your higher power and what's causing your problems. The purpose of step 5 is to have these things that are blocking you off from your higher power revealed. And once we finish step 5, the instructions that deal with us are done. And then we move to step 6 and 7, where we start talking to God and looking for his help. So step 6 is where we're entirely ready to have God remove all of these defects of character. And what we do here is we read over the list of character defects that we identified in our inventories, and we basically say, ask ourselves, do you want them removed? Hopefully your answer is yes. If not, you ask God to help you be willing. We're standing in the place that yes, we want them to be removed. Therefore, we go to step 7, humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. The seventh step prayer is now, remember, we made a decision in step 3. Now we're saying, okay, my creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, the good and the bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me the strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Remember, all of our character defects will not be lifted immediately. We only have to be continuously nudged in the right direction. And this is where we get these nudges from God. So when we say our prayers each morning, we have our character defects that we identified. And what we're doing is we're asking God to, please, God, stop me from being a procrastinator. So I name the character defect and teach me to be someone who does what needs to be done immediately. That is the character asset. And you'll do this immediately for each character defect, which is things. Please, God, stop me from being lazy and teach me to be someone who does what needs to be done immediately. Please, God, stop me from being jealous and teach me to be happy for others. Please, God, stop me from being mean-spirited and teach me to be kind. And throughout the day, whenever these character defects crop up, we take a deep breath, ask God to stop us from being that character defect and teach us to be the asset or its opposite. And then we act as if we're someone who has that asset. God is not going to immediately remove our defects because nature abhors a vacuum. If it's removed and you don't have the right thing to replace it with, something that may not enhance your life can creep in. So, for example, I give up smoking, I start overeating. That's not something that would be a good thing. It can affect my health. So God's going to give us many opportunities to practice the character asset. And when he thinks we've learned enough, he will remove the character defect, which comes with practice. The use of step 7 in step 10 is where the remaining character defects get removed. And this is the continuous part of it. Oops, because we live our lives shaped by our habits, which is a past action repeated over and over and over again so that it becomes automatic. As an alcoholic, our fight or flight response gets triggered more easily, and our character defects have been repeated so often that they are our automatic unconscious response to having a part of ourselves hurt, threatened, or interfered with. Therefore, they came into play to protect us, and they may have been appropriate for our survival at a particular point in our life, but they've outlived their usefulness, and now they've caused problems for us. And this is where we looked at Dr. Stephen Covey's stimulus response proactivity model, where we separate the stimulus from the response and we pause. And we go into that circle of concern and circle of influence, the smaller circle. The smaller circle in the center has to do with the things that I can influence. The larger circle has to do with all of the things in the world I could have a concern about. And it boils down to the serenity prayer. That's where I overlaid Covey's work with our serenity prayer. which is God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. That's the stuff that's out here. The courage to change the things I can. That's the stuff that's in here, and the wisdom to know the difference between the two, which brings us back to that proactivity model where we pause, we say the serenity prayer, we look at, we draw upon the four endowments of the human personality: self-awareness, imagination, conscience, and independent will. Remember, we have choices. I know I'm an alcoholic. I have a problem. What is the best solution for me to use to solve this problem? And now I have choices, which is what gives me my response. Step 7 and the use of step 7 and step 10 teaches us not to react inappropriately to everyday situations that we might misinterpret as threatening. As an alcoholic, I misinterpret things. I make it about me. They're doing it to me. But what step 7 teaches us is that the things that are unmanageable in our lives, it shows us these are the things that upset us and the things that we're afraid of. And all of these things are caused by our distortion of what's actually going on around us, are giving more credit and attention to these things than they deserve, and then having our character defects come up to try to protect us. So this is where we start really looking at, what are my character defects doing? For me, I always say that the people pleasing was a big one for me, because to me that was, this was just the way I was supposed to be. I didn't know that I could, if I didn't want to do something, it was perfectly within my rights to say, no, I don't want to do that. But I thought that I had to do what you wanted me to do. So, therefore, the behavior associated with that was so well ingrained that I just thought it was normal. I found out that I didn't have to, if I didn't want to do something, I could say no. And that's where we start looking at steps 8 and 9, which are the steps that are used to correct the wreckage of the past. So in step 8, we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. We had all our index cards, and we brought them together with our sponsor to decide how we were going to make these amends. Step 9, we made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. And we do step 9 to set right the wrongs of the past, to clean up our side of the street. So once we do step 9, we're done spending any more time feeling guilty. If some of the people we've harmed choose to hold on to their pain, or if they decide to bear a grudge, even in the face of our sincere requests for forgiveness, we have to realize we're free from the burden of the wrong, and whatever they do, they do. Because when we've completed the previous 8 steps, we're a different person than who we were at step 1. Each step gives us the strength to do the next. So after doing step 7, some of your character defects will have either been removed or diminished, and you'll have the experience of acting as if you're the opposite. And this is good, because then you'll not react inappropriately or retaliate if any of step 9 doesn't go smoothly, because you've been given new skills. You have a new relationship with your higher power. So when you've done step 8, you're going to want to set right the wrongs from the past. And because now you have God in your life, you begin to realize that the outcome of everything, including your step 9 amends, are totally in your higher power's hands. And by this point in your recovery, it's absolutely fine with you, which now brings us to the 9th step, promises, which is talking about, it states, if we're painstaking about this phase of our development, we'll be amazed before we are halfway through. What this is talking about is the 9th step. I used to think that it had to do with all the steps, and therefore it was at step 6. But then as I read it, it states, if we are painstaking about this phase of our development, That's referring to the 9th step. So we're going to be amazed before we're halfway through the 9th step. And this is where we start to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience, blah, and basically comes down to we will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them. So this finishes the part from our drinking steps. The work that we do from steps 4 through 9, we are dealing with our drinking. All of the things that we did, we're clearing away the wreckage of the past. That brings us to step 10, which is continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. So what this is saying is I continue to take personal inventory. I do my 4th step once. Ongoing, I do the 10th step. I always get a kick out of it when I hear someone say, well, I have to do another 4th step. No, you did your 4th step when you were cleaning up the wreckage of the past from your drinking. When you're doing another inventory, you're doing a 10th step. I mean, I know it's just semantics. The process is the same, but when you read these, that's what it says. They go in order. So step 10 is where we start to put all the footwork we've been doing in the previous 9 steps into action, which the next instruction is on page 84, which states that this thought brings us to step 10, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. We vigorously commenced this way of living as we cleaned up the past. This is where we have entered the world of the spirit. And our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness, which is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. This is what it's saying. It continues for our lifetime. We do this all the time. We continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. And when they crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. We discuss them with someone immediately and make amends quickly if we have harmed anyone. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Love and tolerance is our code. So what we're doing in step 10 is steps 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We're doing this over and over and over again. That's why it says it should continue for our lifetime. Note, it states we ask God at once to remove them. This means we go to God at once. It does not mean we tell God immediately to remove our character defects. We do a step 10 as soon as we notice that twinge, which tells us something is not quite right. Remember, the nightly review is not step 10. The nightly review is part of step 11. Step 10 is done immediately. Step 10 is your higher power's way of giving you a chance to act as if you're the opposite of your character defects. God will not remove any character defect until he believes you have learned and practiced the opposite enough. And step 10 gives you many opportunities to practice the asset. The important part of step 10 is to realize that whatever is happening in your life is just a way for you to learn to be the opposite of your character defects. Once you get to step 10, you stop doing the step 7 morning prayers of asking for the character defects to be removed and taught their opposites, because in step 10, God decides which character defects he wants you to work on, and he will give you many opportunities to learn the lesson you're supposed to learn. So, step 10 is doing the same things we did in steps 4 through 9. But while what we did originally for steps 4 through 9 was used to clean up the things from our past, step 10 is used to immediately clean up things as they happen from this point forward. So step 10 is the exact moment that you're angry, worried, afraid about to harm someone or have harmed someone. You immediately do step 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 5. If you're upset with someone, you immediately do a resentment inventory and stop being angry. If you're worried or afraid, immediately do a fear inventory and stop being frightened. If you're about to harm someone or are harming someone, immediately do the harm inventory and stop harming another person. Then move on to step 6. Do you want the character defects you just found in the inventory removed? If yes, move on to step 7. Ask God to remove these defects and teach you to be the opposite, and then act as if you're someone who has these character assets. If you've harmed someone, become willing to make amends in step 8. Then do step 9 if an apology is needed. Make it, and then whether or not an apology was necessary, make plans on how you're going to amend your ways so that you do not repeat the same negative behaviors in the future, and then incorporate these into your daily life. After that, do step 5. Call your sponsor or someone and say, "Hi, this is so and so. I was just," and say the character defect. So I'd say, "Hi, this is Marianne. I was just mean spirited." And for a fear or harm, after telling your sponsor the character defects, you can, if you want, tell your sponsor what actions you will take to incorporate this into your daily life. Step 10 is a very important step because this is where we start to become recovered. An important thing to remember when you start doing step 10 is your life is not all of a sudden going to hell. What's happening is that God is putting you in situations where you can learn to be the opposite of your character defects. So you want to learn the lessons quickly because each successive lesson may not be as gentle as the previous one. You made a decision to let God be in charge in step 3. You gave God permission to mold you to who he wants you to be in step 7. In step 10, he starts that transformation and will do whatever he needs to do to get your attention. So pay attention. By doing steps 1 through 9 properly, you've removed the things blocking you off from your higher power. And now there's nothing interfering with you receiving messages, lessons in step 10, and guidance in step 11 from your higher power. Everything happening in step 10 is from your higher power. Everything happening in step 10 is from your higher power to either teach you something you need to learn or to protect you from something in the future. Without this realization, there's nothing to ever be upset about. The gift for believing this is peace of mind and finding a quick, easy solution to every situation you find yourself in. Now, for step 10, we have worksheets just like we do in step 4. Basically, they're the same thing because step 10 is used the moment anything disturbs your peace of mind. It doesn't matter if it's a small inconvenience or a giant hit to your ego or anything in between. Any resentment or harm it is disturbing to your peace of mind. It interferes with your connection to your higher power. So we do a step 10 for resentment whenever you're upset or feel hurt. For fear, whenever you're worried, concerned, or afraid, and or a harm whenever you have a mean thought or actually hurt someone. So when we look at the step 10 a worksheet. This is for a resentment. Oh, and what we look at is, who am I mad at? Why am I mad? Did it affect my self-esteem? Um, what part of self? How did I get the ball rolling? Was I selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, inconsiderate? So what I basically do is in column 1, I write down who I'm upset with. In column 2, I write down what they did. In column 3, I check off the part of self that was affected. In column 4, I write down how I got the ball rolling. In column 5, I write down what character defect um, was part of this. Then I reverse the resentment and I read it forward, and then I reverse it and I read it backward. Does it ring true? Um, then, if it makes sense, I move on to step 6 and ask myself if I want to have God remove those character defects I just found. Um, if yes, I do a step 7 and ask God to remove the character defect and teach me to be the opposite. And then I act as if I'm someone who possesses that character asset. Then in my harm inventory, this would be a harm inventory whenever I have a mean thought or I cause harm. Um, and then I would do this harm inventory. First off, I would I'd write the name of the person I harmed, what I did to harm them. And in this instance, what part of self got satisfaction. What should I have done differently and what will I do in the future? And then what character defects allowed me to do that? Um, then, if this is an inventory using sex, you ask yourself if you created jealousy, suspicion, and or bitterness. Then you look at column 5 and you ask yourself if you want to have God remove the character defects you found. If yes, you ask God to remove the defects and teach you to be the opposite, and then act as if you possess the character assets. So then you amend your ways. You immediately apologize to the person as long as it doesn't create another harm. And you amend your ways so that you don't do this in the future. And then you look at column 4. These are the behaviors that you're going to do the next time you find yourself in the same situation moving forward. And then we look at fears. At the top, we look at, well, what am I afraid of? I would do a fear inventory whenever I'm worried or concerned. I would also look at my step 10 resentment inventory and my harms inventory. Um, if I did them and look at column 5, was frightened checked off on either or both forms. So you would write in column 1 what you're afraid of. In column 2, you're afraid of it because the reason why. In column 3, do I realize that I'm relying on myself instead of God? In column 4, I write down everything I can think of that I can do to make sure that the fear does not happen. In column 5, I write down what character defects might stop me from doing what I decided I needed to do in column 4. Then I go back and I review what I wrote in column 4 to see what footwork I need to do in order to minimize the chance that this will happen. Look at the character defects that I've listed in column 5 and then ask if I want to have God remove those character defects. and then ask God to remove those character defects. Then, after completing steps 4, 6, 7, and 9, these parts of step 10 for any and all of the inventories, then you need to do step 5, call your sponsor with the character defects. Remember, every resentment and every harm is ultimately caused by a fear. While the step 10 fear inventory is used every time you're worried, concerned, or frightened. It should also be used as a companion inventory when you do a resentment um, or a harm inventory. Now, some people like to carry little copies of the forms around them with them. Some people will carry like a little book with them. Another option is that there are a lot of apps that are out there. I have some apps on my, I have some apps on my phone. Wait a minute. Some apps, there's the 12-step toolkit. There's the everything, my spiritual companion. I have several of them on my phone. Sometimes I use them. You can find some really good ones on there. The sober sidekick is another one. Some people like to just carry them around with them, and they really do. They really can help. So all of these things, you've got your inventory forms on the 12-step toolkit. There's a lot of different ones that are out there. The end result is basically being willing to follow the instructions, and I love technology. I say if you like technology and these things work for you, I say use them. The point is following the process. Some people, after years, you can just do it in your head after years of doing this over and over again, which that works as well. Anyone who works the steps as they're outlined in the big book will reach the place Bill describes as being rocketed into the 4th dimension. And that'll be reflected in just about everything they do and say as they move forward. Now, again, the difference between steps 10 and 11, it's important to understand this, that step 10 is done immediately or as soon as possible to clean up things as they occur. In other words, I snapped at someone. Excuse me, I didn't mean, I'm feeling rushed right now. I didn't mean to snap at you. It's done immediately. Step 11 is done at night as a review. Step 10 is that continuous fine tuning of who I'm supposed to be. It's God's way of kind of testing me and allowing me to get into these situations that I have to learn certain lessons. He's not done with me yet. So the difference between step 10, which is done immediately, and step 11, which is reviewing, planning, and being guided, is that step 10 is where God teaches me the lessons, and step 11 is where I put them into practice. So that when I go from step 10 to step 11, I want to be content with whatever life brings me, because everything is an opportunity to deepen my connection with my higher power, which is the thinking that moves me to step 11.
Thank you so much for your participation. I hope you enjoyed the workshop, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. And now, please join me in our closing prayer, which is St. Faustina's prayer for mercy. Eternal God, in whom mercy is endless and the treasury of compassion inexhaustible, look kindly upon us and increase your mercy in us, that in difficult moments we might not despair nor become despondent, but with great confidence submit ourselves to your holy will, which is love and mercy itself. Amen.